Men's sheds have come a long way since its creation many years ago. It's been going for more than 10 years now here in Australia. And as we evolve, it's quite important that the committees of management of our men's sheds are well informed and equipped to deal with the intricacies of running a men's shed. It's an incorporated body. You have responsibilities, and therefore what the Australian Men's Shed Association has done is that we have partnered with not-for-profit law experts, Justice Connect, to assist you in producing a number of sessions that we're going to do for you, and they will be able to equip you with the knowledge that you need in order to meet your legalities and meet your responsibilities under your respective incorporation acts, no matter which state that you are in. So today we are joined by Bodhi Dunn and Daniel Komisarov, and these two people are very highly skilled and very experienced in all areas of not-for-profit law. And it's great to have you here today. And let's start with you, Bodhi. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll hear from Daniel?
Yep, sure. So I'm a lawyer in the team at Not-for-Profit Law. I've been in the team for about 2 years. And as part of my role, I regularly provide advice and training. Sometimes we do some advocacy work on for not-for-profit laws, so advocating for changes to the laws that we think are really important for not-for-profits.
And Daniel?
Thanks, Paul. I'm also a lawyer in Justice Connect's not-for-profit law team. I, like Bodhi, sit across all the service delivery of not-for-profit law, working on resources, direct advice, training, advocacy on behalf of the not-for-profit sector.
Excellent. Well, welcome to you both. And you guys, you do a lot of training for a wide variety of organisations and community groups. What are some of the areas that that are most common that you believe for our men's shed network?
Yeah, we assist not-for-profit groups and in particular men's sheds on a whole range of legal issues, but we thought we'd talk specifically about three broad areas that are really relevant to all men's sheds. They include incorporation, governance, and really importantly right now, safety and insurance.
And I might explain a little bit more about what we actually mean by incorporation and why it's really important for a men's shed to understand what an incorporated entity is. So
that's a great question, and that was going to be my next question, Bodhi. So, it may not be something that our sheds are a term that they're familiar with. So what do you mean by incorporation?
So incorporation is essentially when a group comes together and decides to register with a government body. So that can either be a national body, or in the case of men's sheds, it would likely be a state body. And by registering with the government, the group then needs to follow a number of different obligations. So, for example, they need to follow rules that have been drafted for them. They'll need to have regular meetings with different issues. They'll likely also need to report on their financial situation to the government. And it can get a little bit complicated when you do incorporate, because there is quite a few specific things that you do need to actually do, and it can be a little bit confusing. But we think incorporation is really important to understand that when you do incorporate, you do create that separate legal entity. And what that means is that the people that are involved in the organisation can no longer be held responsible. Rather, it's the actual legal entity. So, for example, if you had an unincorporated group and an incorporated group, so a men's shed that was unincorporated and then an incorporated men's shed, and say that there was committee members in both and they both held a working bee, and both groups asked a volunteer to get up onto the roof of a building just to clean out the drains. If the volunteer fell off and really hurt themselves in both of those situations, if the group was unincorporated, the volunteer would only be able to sue the committee members, and there's a potential that the committee members of that unincorporated group would have to pay for the damages out of their own personal assets, which can be really concerning. Whereas if it is an incorporated group, that volunteer would only be able to access the assets of the group, and wouldn't be able to actually, and that means that the committee members do have that protection, and that's known as the principle of limited liability. So it's a really important thing, and that groups are aware of that when they do incorporate.
Excellent. And what are some of the other common questions that you may get when it comes to incorporation?
Yeah, so it's those sort of things that relate to running the group. So maybe, how do we run our AGM? How do we vote at our AGM? Or at the moment, we're getting lots of questions around how do we run an online AGM? Also things like fundraising. How do we run a fundraising? Is there any laws that we have to follow if we are fundraising? Those sort of things.
Excellent, excellent. Now, one of the big buzzwords when it comes to the sheds, it was all very, in the early days, it was all very, I've got to be careful what I say here. It was, well, I'll use the word a bit loose, but once you become incorporated, there are, the word governance comes in, and governance is very topical at the moment. So what do you mean by governance?
Yeah, absolutely, Paul. Governance essentially refers to how a men's shed is run. And we know in a not-for-profit that there are a number of different roles with different responsibilities. But ultimately, a men's shed is run by the committee, and there are certain processes that the committee must follow to ensure that the men's shed is successfully governed. So if we go back to Bodhi's example earlier of the incorporated group, let's say Darren is a committee member of the incorporated men's shed. He might also be the president. So let's say Darren has decided to put off holding a committee meeting for about 6 months because he's just incredibly busy, doesn't have time. Let's say Darren says to the treasurer, Rob, well, I'm going to leave everything with you. I really don't have time to worry about any of this. So about 2 weeks later, Rob might get a letter from a third of the men's shed's members requesting a special general meeting to be held. Normally, Rob might ask the rest of the committee about what to do with this letter, but the committee doesn't have time to call a special general meeting. About 3 months later, the committee then receives a court notice, and the members of the med shed are claiming that the committee isn't fulfilling its obligations under the rules. So we really regularly have to remind not-for-profits that all committee members have that duty to ensure that they are engaging in the governance of the not-for-profit. And that a really important part of that is understanding its rules. So if not, and a bit like the example I gave, that can escalate all the way to court. So some of the types of questions we get around governance include, do we need to have a constitution? Can we get help drafting one? Or we haven't updated our constitution in years and we want to make changes. How do we do this? A committee member's just resigned over COVID. Or do we have to appoint a new committee member? We are interested in starting a new program. Is that consistent with our constitution? How do we do that? So, Paul, they're the types of issues, and that's what we're talking about when we mentioned governance.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. One other area that is very important in the men's shed world is occupational health and safety, or workplace health and safety. Have you got any tips, or would you like to expand on the obligations there for men's sheds?
Yeah, so work health and safety is something that I, as a lawyer, and the team regularly give advice to not-for-profits on. And also we run helpful training sessions as well. So it's normally about explaining what the duty of care is and also how a not-for-profit can do those risk assessment procedures to ensure that they are complying with all their obligations under those laws. And as part of that, the not-for-profit and the men's shed do need to consider insurance and consider whether insurance, whilst it's a last step, consider what insurance is appropriate for the organisation. So because the activities of a men's shed are so specific and they are doing some of those things, dealing with power tools, some of those activities that might be excluded from some insurance policies, if a men's shed was just to either contact its local broker just to get a just to get public liability insurance or volunteer personal accident insurance without actually explaining their activities, there's a possibility that if an accident was to occur and maybe an injury occurred when someone was using a power tool, if they then tried to make that claim and then the insurer said, no, actually there's an exclusion clause here that might actually stop you from making a claim in this particular situation. So we can really help with helping an organisation explain to them what might be in their policy, help explain to them, have their policy reviewed just to make sure it is appropriate for the activities that they're actually conducting.
So thanks, Bodhi and Daniel. That's great. We've covered 3 very important areas in governance and incorporation and workplace health and safety. So if a men's shed wants to access further information, where can they go for that?
Yeah, Paul, we have so many free resources available on our website, and a men's shed doesn't need to wait to have a specific legal inquiry to get our help. They might just like to access more information on these topics and many others through our websites. These are fact sheets, guides, videos, even applications. We also run interactive training sessions on many of the topics that we've spoken about, where we try to explain the law in really plain, basic language, and we use interactive scenarios and activities. These sessions also aim to upskill committee members in these issues and many of the legal issues that are commonly experienced by not-for-profits. So we're delivering that training face-to-face when we can, but mainly online while COVID restrictions apply.
Excellent. Just like the men's shed movement, you are being adaptable given the situation we find us in. And as you guys know, you work right across the country, so you are familiar with individual states, and they all have their quirks and intricacies, I suppose. So we do look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Paul.
Cool.